get the real heaven, the real good one, and then there's like a scaled down RV version of it. I don't know. Sorry.
But they don't live forever.
Oh, the ones in the second
The
level?
second class don't live forever. It all depends how much you donate and how long you live. Yeah. Only the 144,000 live forever.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay, that's so sad to me. I hope it's obvious. I'm in danger here because when I bring up some subjects, I should take the time to explain a little bit more. I'm just banking on the fact that most people understand 144,000 is symbolic. And by the way, why in the book of Revelation would you use the 144,000? What's so significant about the number 12?
12 tribes.
12 tribes in the Old Testament,
Apostles.
12 apostles in the New Testament, 12 times 12, 144. And the number 1,000 is used many times in the book of Revelation to mean what? It just means a significant number, a large number, great number. So you've got all God's people in the Old Testament, New Testament are usually represented by 144,000. In fact, one of the places that you'll find 144,000 mentioned in the book of Revelation, it uses a synonymous statement, parallel statement, and it's myriads upon myriads, and it's a term, can't count them. So in the same context, he's talking about God's people, and in one instance he calls them 144,000. Another one he says you can't count them. Same context, talking about the same group of people. Well, that's a pretty good indication that we're talking symbolically, especially in a book like Revelation. All the references to the millennium are in one passage in the book of Revelation. And if most people get the idea that 144,000 is not literal, then why? Why do we get hung up on the fact that when it's 1,000, it has to be literal in the middle of a book like that? Okay, you can already tell that I'm not one of the people who believe that it's going to be a literal 1,000-year, but I don't want to be overly prejudiced in presenting this. By the way, how does the millennium help us? It shouldn't be the word use. It's a bad thing about spell check. When it's a real word, it doesn't catch it. Help us understand the Antichrist, the tribulation, the rapture, resurrection, first and second resurrection. All these things hinge off of your view of the millennium. Okay, there are four major views of the millennium, and that's all my goal tonight is just to lay out the basic views of the millennium. And if we need to build on this or take more time, we'll do that next week. And then we're going to pretty quickly come to an end on systematic theology, and we're going to go to the book of Revelation. We're just going to go to the book of Revelation because I hate sliding this stuff. And it really deserves to be understood. And the book of Revelation is a great book to study if you want to review the entire Bible. So we're going to study the book of Revelation and get a good overview of the entire Bible in the process and come back to this in detail when we get to chapter 20. Okay? So is that my little way out of getting too deep tonight? Okay, four major views. The first major view of the 1,000-year period, the millennium, would be called the post-millennial view. Postmillennialism used to be a lot more popular than it is today. There are some people who still hold to this today. I hope once I explain this or give you an overview, you'll understand why it's not so popular anymore. Okay, but let's break down the words. What does millennium mean? Okay, what does post mean?
Before.
Post does not mean before. Who was taking bets on it? Okay, yeah, it's after what? No, the 1,000 years comes after, I'm sorry, Jesus comes after the 1,000 years. Postmillennialism is the belief, and so when we talk about pre or post, we are talking about the second coming. When does a millennium happen in relation to Jesus coming back? Premillennialism would say that there's going to be a millennial period before Jesus returns, and it takes quite literal view of that. Post-millennialism, some people take a literal view, and some post-millennialists don't take a literal view of the 1,000 years, but nonetheless, they say it's after the millennium. The second coming happens after this millennial period. Look at the chart. The chart starts with creation, broken line there, because we're just reviewing history of mankind. You've got the Old Testament age. The cross is a significant time factor here. So the little cross there, right after the Mosaic age of Moses. I can't say that right. Yes, thank you. There's a cross, so Jesus comes. Jesus ascends back into heaven. What happens after Jesus leaves? Well, the church has been established, right? Okay. Most of the, I've given you two charts here because there's slight variation in this. But the concept is this. After Jesus left, the church was established, and most post-millennialists have no problem associating the church with the kingdom. A thumbs up on that. Passages like Colossians chapter 1, verse 13, you've been delivered from the domain of darkness and brought into the kingdom of his Son. Talking about anybody who becomes a Christian, you're a part of the kingdom. Well, that sounds like you're part of the kingdom, doesn't it? It doesn't sound like, oh, there's no kingdom yet. Kingdom's going to be later on. So you're part of the church, and later on you'll be part of the kingdom. Well, that's not what it says. Colossians 1:13 says you have been delivered from the domain of darkness, and as soon as you're saved, you're no longer in Satan's realm, you're in the kingdom. That's the term it uses. So postmillennialism, I think, has that going for it, that the kingdom is often associated with the church. However, do you notice the dotted line going upward?
Yeah.
Here's the concept that's part and parcel to postmillennialism. You've got to have this part or you miss it. The idea is when the church was established, Jesus gave his followers the Great Commission, a commission. Here's your mission. Here's what you're supposed to do. We've got one job to do. What is it?
Go make disciples of all nations.
Disciple makers. Thank you so much. Matthew chapter 28. It's all about discipleship. And when he gave that mission to his church went out and started doing it, and they took the message across the globe. And as they took the message across the globe, it grows and grows and grows, has greater and greater impact. That's why the line's going up. And the concept was this: the more that Christianity gets out to everybody, the more it has the influence that God wants it to have. Lives are better, life is better, and the world becomes a better place. Okay, now think about this for a minute. Where Christianity goes, does it have an impact on the countries and the cultures where it goes?
Yes.
I don't know how much you follow mission work, but undeniably things get better. So, especially in the early age of missionary work, when we were going across the globe, this was a very popular view. Because people were like, wow, once we take Christianity everywhere, I mean, look what it did to Africa, look what it did to India, look what it did to different parts of Asia and things like that. People who were, again, I don't want to take this for granted. I don't know how much you know. I don't know very much, but what I know about the history of some of the Asian countries before Christianity came, it was bleak. If you were not a part of the right kind of family, the right kind of clan, you had no hope. Things were very difficult, and Christianity came and made things a lot better. Well, here was the concept. The concept was, as Christianity grows and the kingdom, Christianity turns more into what God always wanted his kingdom to be, where the king rules, and he rules everything. Then it's going to get to the place where life is so good, there's no more evil. It's so good, everybody loves everybody. And it's just wonderful. Paradise on earth before the second coming. Now, they will admit that right at the end, and you can't get away from this, you can't get away from this, there's a period where Satan is loosed. So, right before the end, things do get bad. But, before that brief little period, things just keep getting better and better and better. Okay. With the missionary movement, that was a very popular view, what do you think happened historically that just kind of took the wind out of the sails of people who were post-millennialists? Not Islam, World War I and World War II. World War I and World War II. And it opened people's eyes. I mean, you could not deny it. Could not deny it. And so instead of things getting better and better and becoming a paradise here on earth, post-millennialism, some people who still hold to that would say, well, that was just a blip on the screen. Things are going to get better again. We just need to get the gospel out there. And you know what? As is often the case, there are grains of truth in just about everything. Because, you know, when the gospel hits an area where it hasn't been before, it has an economic impact. It has a moral impact. Life does really change for the better in a lot of ways. But does it do away with evil? No. Not everybody becomes a Christian. Not everybody does. So that's, they're not hung up on 1,000 years having to be a literal 1,000-year period. If you notice, there's a line on the first chart, not the second chart. Some post-millennialists, as I understand this, would make a distinction. As the church continues to grow, then you can finally call it the kingdom. Right? Some post-millennialists don't make that distinction. The church, the kingdom, they're okay with that. But this idea of things getting better and better until right at the very end gets real bad and then Christ comes back. That's post-millennialism. I'm ready to go on. It's not a big one. Oh, no, I need to make a critique of this. Why don't we accept, I don't know what you accept. Why don't I accept post-millennialism? What scripture can I offer you? I want to offer you a few examples. In Matthew, the 7th chapter, in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus talked about the path that leads to righteousness versus the path that leads to destruction, which one was bigger?
Destruction.
Yeah. Narrow is the way that leads to life. Broad is the path that leads to destruction. That doesn't sound like the gospel's going to go out and most people are going to become Christians. Yeah, the gospel's going to go out and people are going to have an opportunity and most of them are going to reject it. That seems more consistent with Jesus' message. So Matthew 7, 13, and 14, I think, kind of go against that. The idea of most people being saved doesn't go with Matthew chapter 7. I would also offer 1 Timothy 4, first few verses, as well as 2 Timothy 3, verses 12 and 13. 2 Timothy 3:12. Does anybody remember that one? Anybody who desires to live a godly life will be persecuted. He's warning them, you can count on persecution. The very next verse he says, you know what's happening in our world? Things are bad and they're getting worse. By the way, he said that in the first century. Have you ever heard anybody say that today? They're getting worse. Yeah. They're getting worse. That kind of contradicts postmillennialism, doesn't it? When he uses the phrase, things go from bad to worse. Okay? That kind of goes against it. The idea, there's one other thing, again, I'm just kind of going overview here, and maybe I'm going a little too quickly, but part of postmillennialism that I think goes against what the Scripture teaches is this idea that when you become Christians, then that means that things will get better economically, things will get better in every way, you'll have a blessed, physically, materialistically blessed life. Okay, I know that's quite popular on some TV channels. I know that's quite popular. I don't see that as being biblical. The verse we just quoted, right? 2 Timothy 3:12. Anybody who desires to live a godly life will be persecuted. How about the passage, the text we started going through on Sunday mornings? How does James open up his book? Consider it pure joy when you face trials of various kinds. Yeah, it's going to come. It's going to happen. Part of being a Christian does not mean life gets materialistically better. You know what? Maybe God will bless you materialistically. Maybe He won't. Maybe He won't. The joys and the blessings are not necessarily tied to materialistic physical ones, right? Okay, I'm just going to go with that because I know you guys and I know you've studied a lot of this before, so I think I can go on. Okay, premillennialism, we have to divide it into two different areas because there's the historical or traditional premillennialism. So if you ever read something that's 1800s or older, you're probably going to be dealing with this kind of premillennialism, and it's not the same as the one that's popular today. Number 3 is the big one that is massively popular today, and I would venture to say 9 times out of 10 or even more, when somebody wants to talk about the millennium today, they are number 3. It's called dispensational premillennialism. There are some variations within that, but before we get to that, let's just take the historical premillennial. So postmillennial means Christ returns after the millennium. Premillennial means Christ returns before. So Christ is going to come back before millennium. Just look at this first chart. Don't look at number 3 yet, because you'll get a headache. Just stay with number 2. Traditional or historical, classical, there are a lot of different names, but the old style of premillennialism had the church age. The church age, and I'm glad, I don't know if they did this on purpose or not, but I'm glad the church age, do you notice it's in parentheses? That is very significant to premillennialism. Because premillennialism, especially the one we're going to get into in a minute, but this is true with both of them. The idea is based on a very literalistic interpretation of anything said about Israel and anything said about the kingdom. So if you're talking about Israel and you take a premillennial view, it has to be national, racial, physical Israel. So they would I can't say this, I was going to be a little caustic here, I shouldn't. But when the Apostle Paul says in Galatians chapter 3, it's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free, anyone who's been baptized in Christ has been clothed with Christ, and you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to the promise. They would say, well, yeah, but still it's just Israel. They'll look at passages like that, they won't disagree with it, but they'll still come back and say, but it still has to be the nation of Israel and Jewish descent. Okay, I'm sorry, I just can't do this without taking a little aside here. The people who have studied this just boggles my mind because there's so many assumptions being made here. Did you know, I'm just going to throw this out here. Did you know that nobody today can really prove that they're a Jew? Did you know that? And I'll just say it because you're thinking it. Well, I can tell because he's got the big nose. No! Going back to the 1200s, is it the 1200s or the 1000s? You've studied this a little bit more than I have. Yeah, I think you have. You've been, Seth and Chin have been listening to a bunch of these lessons on this topic, but George Fall has some really neat information here, and the DeSoto family can trace their lineage back further than anybody else. And I can't remember if it's the 1000s or the 1200s. I'm thinking it's the 1200s. They go back further than anybody. What happens? There is a massive loss of material. Nobody can trace their lineage back further than that. Yeah.
I just wanted to say today in our class, in Glenn's class, we talked about Abraham, the fact that he was a Gentile. God made him a Jew.
That's right. That's right.
So,
Yeah, we don't even use the term Jew till much later. That's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
But I mean, he was the father of all nations,
Right.
so
Well,
if they really want to say,
After he
yeah, they sure. That's why they talk about anti-Semitic. You know what that term means? What does anti-Semitic mean? What means you're against Jews? But why do they use the term Semitic? It's descendants of Shem. Who's Shem?
one of
Noah's
Noah's
son.
kids.
Yes. So they want to go way back previous to that, and they want to follow Shem all the way down through Abraham and much further. So that's the idea of that. I'm getting way off track. Let me get back to this. Why did I get off track? Because church is in parentheses. Okay, now I remembered why I got off track. If you take a very literalistic view of this, and we're talking kingdom has to be a physical kingdom, and it has to be with Jewish people of Jewish descent, and we're lucky to be involved with them, but they're the ones who are going to be the key to this, right? Well, then how do you explain everything like Galatians chapter 3? How do you explain all this stuff that happens in the New Testament? I'm really trying to be fair here. Here's the explanation. Jesus came to set up a physical kingdom with Jews. Jews rejected him, so it's kind of like, okay, we're going to have to go to plan B, and we'll get back to this later. So right now, let's just start the church where everybody gets to be involved and stuff like that. So the church is a parenthetical issue on the timeline of what God really intended.
Oh.
That's why it's in parentheses. It was never part of God's major plan. God's major plan got derailed because the Jews didn't respond favorably to Jesus. So we're going to come back to the Jews later on. In the meantime, got the church age. But it was never, none of those prophecies had to do with the church. It was all about Israel, and the church is just plan B. Parenthetical, right?
But the first 10 years was only pretty much just predominantly Jewish people that were
That's right.
converted.
That's right.
And it took after that 10 years that he came to Peter and said, hey, you guys got to get outside.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. Their response to that, though, would be, yeah, it was Jews, but it wasn't a physical kingdom. It was the church. That's not what God wanted.
But Jesus says, my kingdom is not here on this earth.
Yeah. Stop being logical like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I'm trying to give an overview here. Church age. Okay. Towards the end of the church age, we're getting close to Jesus' second coming. I hope that sounds funny to you because it sounds funny to me. There's a first, second coming, and a second coming.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, there's what does apostasy mean? The great apostasy. But what does apostasy mean? Falling away. Falling away. There's going to be a massive falling away. It's not just people all the time fall away, right? Not everybody's faithful. This is, again, I'm so sorry. This is so curious to me because the dominant view that says there's going to be a great apostasy also says that nobody can lose their salvation. Okay, how do you add that up? Okay, I'll be fair. They would say it's great apostasy because they were never really saved in the first place. That would be their answer. Okay, you've got these. This is the pre-trib, means the tribulation comes beforehand. There's going to be a time of great wickedness. The Antichrist, one particular, we're not talking about anybody against Christ. We're going to talk about one historical figure who comes and makes life miserable for anybody who wants to serve God. And he will be dominant in the world, and this will be Armageddon. It will be the assault on the church, will be the war against God's people. That'll take place here until the rapture. The rapture. This rapture, by the way, is different in dispensationalism. So, what does the word rapture mean? Just means taken up. Who's going to be taken up? Do you see the word rapture after tribulation here?
Yeah.
Okay. Rapture would be God's people, the righteous dead and the righteous living are taken up to be with Christ. The culmination of the fight with the Antichrist would be the Battle of Armageddon, and Jesus will destroy the Antichrist. So this guy who for a limited period of time has been making life miserable for all God's people during the tribulation, Jesus comes back to take his, so he takes them all and destroys the Antichrist. Okay, he took them all, now he's going to bring them back. So he takes them up, and then he comes back with them. So why does he take everybody up and then come back? Because he takes them up and gives you a glorified body. So you no longer have a physical body. You have a glorified body. What's the difference between a physical and glorified body? 1 Corinthians 15. It's no longer mortal, it's immortal. No longer perishable, imperishable. Right? Remember that whole passage about this perishable must put on imperishable, mortal immortality? Okay, they say that takes place at this time. Right? I'm all over that when the Bible talks about you have to have immortal bodies to live forever in eternity. Right?
Right.
But this view says you get that immortal body and you come back during the millennium. Okay, so you're back here on earth. The redeemed have these new bodies, and Satan is bound. So the redeemed come back. We're back here on earth. And during this period of the millennium, it's a paradise on earth. How would you describe this paradise? They would look at passages in Isaiah where it talks about the lion laying down with the lamb. No animals are meat eaters anymore. They're all herbivores. The desert places will bloom. Those passages, which by the way, that comes from Isaiah as well. They take that literally. They mean there will be no desert. Life will be perfect. It will be a garden of Eden all over the place. That's the millennium, and it's literal, physical, right here on earth. Until you get to the very end of this 1,000 years. So it's going to last 1,000 years. At the end, Satan is loose. There's the battle of Gog and Magog. And this terrible fighting goes on. But then we have Jesus to the rescue again.
That's the second coming?
Yeah, that's a little clearer in dispensational premillennialism, but up here, yes. Jesus comes back and helps with the victory over Satan after he's loose. We win the battle of Gog and Magog. Now we've got another resurrection of the wicked dead. See that first resurrection back there when Jesus came back the first time? The righteous people are taken and the righteous dead are raised. But the wicked dead are still in the ground. They're not raised. So the wicked people who lived all that throughout history, they're not raised till the end. And we have the great white throne judgment, talked about in Revelation chapter 20, and then the eternal states. Okay? No questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's in the Marvel comics.
Well, no, actually, I was gonna, this is the view that, why can't I think of the name?
The Left Behind series and all that
Yes.
stuff? Yeah. No, not really, but it's kind of based on this. It's dispensational. Dispensational premillennialism, number 3, is like this view on steroids.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to get deeper, but it helps to have this view first because we get to stick our toe in the water and see what it's about. Yeah.
But one of the keys here is that it depends on a physical Jewish kingdom or...
Yes, by the way, yeah, thank you. Because that millennium, it's not only a literal 1,000 years, it's a physical, earthly kingdom, and it's, all Jews are saved in that. There's the restoration. Is that on here somewhere where it says all the Jews? Yeah,
Jews converted.
Jews converted. All the Jews are converted. Even the ones who didn't want to be converted, they're converted anyway. Why? Because they're Jews.
So in this,
And all Israel will be saved. Yeah.
so in this, nobody goes on to paradise or Hades. You just stay on the ground.
Yeah. Actually, no. They do have paradise and Hades before the millennium. It's your bodies that are still in the ground. Yeah. So they wouldn't deny a lot of that stuff. They would have different views on that, but they don't out and out deny. You got it. Yeah.
So, since all the Jews converted, Paul should have never cried about his fellow man not making it. He should have
Yeah,
done
I'm
it.
telling you,
He should have done
I knew this was going to happen as far as, I agree with you. I can't do a good job of defending this view because I don't think this view is consistent with Scripture. And we've made a real point when we go through the Bible to kind of point out some of these things. And the reason we make a point of this, because this is such a popular view. And I just want us to be equipped biblically to try to answer this popular view. But actually, historical, or the traditional premillennialism is not the popular one. The popular one is called dispensationalism. Why is it called dispensationalism? Because they believe in either 5 or 7 major dispensations. Dispensation would be a period of time. And the concept is this. What does Romans chapter 5 say about those people who lived before the law? Well, it said God didn't hold them to the standard of the law. Right? Remember that? Okay, so they would say pre-Moses, pre-Mount Sinai, that would be a different dispensation. Which, by the way, as far as the Romans chapter 5 concept, I've got no problem with that. That's true. They did have a different relationship with God because they didn't have the law. God didn't hold the standard of the law. Now, when Moses came and God gave him the law, guess what? You have to live by the law now. God holds you to that standard. Well, they would call that a different dispensation. Now things are different. But they divide it into either 5 or 7. I'll give you the 5 because it's easier to remember. The first one would be before the law, right? So that would be Adam, Abraham, that whole era. That'd be before the law. Then you have the law. That'd be the Moses dispensation. So that'd be the first 2 major dispensations. Then when Christ comes, you have the church. That would be a dispensation, but that's the parenthetical one. It's just here for a while, right? And then things get different in the millennium. Millennium, everything's different. We're back to the very physical. Kingdom, Jews, all that stuff. And then the final dispensation is the eternal one, heaven and hell. Now, most of them break it down more than that. Break it down to 7. But those are the 5 major dispensations. So they call it dispensationalism. Do you understand why, though? Because that way they can say, oh yeah, you're talking about the church. This is a different dispensation. We're back to the literal interpretation now, and we can go with the way we want to interpret this, because it's a different dispensation. If you look at this chart for dispensational premillennialism, skip the first one with the image there. Go down to where it starts with the cross. This is where I'm going to outline dispensational premillennialism. Why did I put that one in there with the image? I did that on purpose, and on the next page, Daniel's 70 weeks vision or 70 weeks prophecy, I just want to make a graphic point, and I love this because these are charts that these guys put out, right? The image, if you turn your paper sideways here, you see this image? Looks like a Babylonian image. That's what they're doing the best they can. That comes from Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. It really bothers him. He doesn't know what it means. There's this image. The head's made out of what?
Gold.
Then the shoulders are what?
Silver,
Then the torso's
copper,
bronze. And then it goes down to the
Iron.
iron,
iron. And then the feet are finally
clay.
iron mixed with clay. This great image. And then he sees this little stone cut without hands. So no human, right? Small stone. Out of the mountainside, rolls down the mountainside. What happens to it as it rolls down the mountainside?
It's bigger.
How big does it get?
Bigger than eternity.
Bigger than the whole world. Okay, how can a rock be bigger than the whole world? Hey, there's a clue here. See, we're not making this up that you're being figurative. It has to be figurative, right? Okay, but anyway, it gets bigger than the whole world. What does it do to the image?
Destroyed.
Pulverizes it. Okay, Daniel gives an interpretation for this, and you already know this story, but I'm going to bank on the fact that you know some of these details. When he finally interprets this for King Nebuchadnezzar, he says, you know what that image represents? Major kingdoms of the world. World powers that dominated the world. And he says, which one are you, King Nebuchadnezzar?
Gold.
Head of gold. Never a kingdom like you. World power, right? But he says, after you're done ruling the world, guess what? Another power is going to come along that will rule the world. Okay? The next kingdom. So, if we're following this, and by the way, people don't have problems with the first 3. Not even the premillennialists. We're all on the same page here, right? First one's head of gold, that'd be Babylon. What's the next world power that comes along after Babylon?
Persia.
Yeah, the Medes and the Persians, right? Later on in the book, he's going to talk about the lopsided bear, representing this too. Anyway, he uses a lot of different images, which, by the way, why isn't there this great big lopsided bear? If we're going to be literal here, why is it Persia? Why isn't there a giant, massive, lopsided bear that came through the... I'm sorry. Do you understand what I'm saying? No, if you're going to be literal, be literal. But if you're going to pull out that card and use it sometimes...
Only when it's appropriate.
Only when you want to. And by the way, that's the whole reason I've got this on here. Let me finish the story. Okay, so you got the head of gold, that represents Babylon. Silver represents Medo-Persian Empire. What's the bronze in the middle? Torso?
Greece.
Yeah, that's Greece. Alexander the Great and the generals that followed him. Okay, The next major world power after Greece would be
Rome.
Rome. Rome. World dominant power, right? Okay, most of these you can trace historically, and one gave way to the other. Rome didn't give way to anybody. Rome kind of fizzled out. Oh, it just went downhill. Well, isn't this interesting? Because the iron changes to iron mixed with clay. Right? During that kingdom, during that period of time, Daniel says there's going to be establishment of a new kingdom, but without human hands. It's going to be a godly thing. And it's going to grow so great, it will overcome everything else. So this godly kingdom, one established by God, it's going to be greater than all the kingdoms, man-made kingdoms, right? Okay, to me, if you're following this, you've got Babylon, followed by the Medo-Persian Empire, followed by Greece, followed by Rome. During the period of Rome, guess what happens? Jesus comes, church is established, church goes all over the world. Guess what? We've never seen anything as global, as big as the church, right? So there have not been world powers like this again. I mean, you even talk about what Germany did during World War II. Did they control the world? No. They had a major influence over part of the world, but not the whole world, right? But you've got Christianity comes during that time of the Roman Empire. Everything fits. Dispensational premillennialism does this. It takes the image and it says you got the head of gold, silver, bronze, iron clay. But the iron clay, you need to make the legs real long. And the reason you have to make the legs real long is because the kingdom is going to be established a few thousand years later, during the millennium. Okay. In the name of being very literal here, that's not very literal, making the legs go on forever and ever. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? It's a pick and choose literalism. That's the reason I've got this 70 weeks prophecy, which is, I forget which chapter that is. Is that chapter 9? 7? Chapter 7? Thank you. In Daniel, the 70 weeks prophecy, by the way, is, oh, wow, if people didn't get all the time confused with this literal versus figurative, if you just came with an open mind and looked at this 70 week, it is such a powerful prophecy. Notice on this chart, though, this is a dispensational view of the 70-week prophecy. You've got 69 weeks that lead up to the cross, right? By the way, the word week in the Hebrew just means period of 7. That's all it means. So you're not stuck with weeks. Even literalists aren't stuck with weeks. So if you look at 7 years, and you take this as 7 70s, or 7 sevens, right? If you take that as 70 periods of 7, then you've got the first 69 weeks from, and it specifically says, from the decree given, right? If you start there and you work it works out perfectly to Jesus coming. It's a great prophecy. Okay? But here's the deal. In fact, it works out to the year that Jesus started his earthly ministry. It works out to Jesus' baptism. It works out to Jesus' baptism. Okay, now look at this chart. You've got 69 weeks, and then what do you have in parentheses? Church age. Then you've got one more week. A few thousand years later. Well, come on. If it's a 70-week prophecy, and you guys are hung up on the fact that it has to be literal 70 weeks, then why do you do 69 weeks and then a couple of thousand years later we're going to have the last week? Let me tell you what happens if you don't do that. If you don't do that and you've got this 69 weeks, if we're talking years, it works out perfectly to Jesus' baptism. What happens? Jesus' baptism 69 weeks later, right? The last week, if it's years, that'd be 7 years. What happens 3.5 years after Jesus' baptism? The cross. You know what it says in Daniel happens in the middle of the final week? It says sin is removed in the middle of the final week. So if you just stick with the dates that he gives from the decree that the temple be rebuilt, you go forward the 69 weeks, periods of years, you come to the baptism of Jesus, and then you've got a 7-year period, and it says in the middle, sin is removed. Well, that's when Jesus was on the cross. What happens 3.5 years after Jesus dies on the cross?
Paul's ministry is finished.
Yes, there's a guy on the road to Damascus who's hit with a light. And what happens with the conversion of the Apostle Paul? The missionary effort starts and the message gets out to the world. I get chills when I think about that. But all I'm saying is it's a great prophecy. But what happens is we have to put these big gaps in. And I find that so ironic for a group that bases everything on no, it has to be very... Doesn't that sound inconsistent?
Yeah.
Okay, since I rambled on so much, I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to stop tonight. We've got 3 minutes left. We'll pick up next week and we'll jump into dispensational premillennialism. Okay, we've got our toes wet, but you haven't seen anything yet, right? It gets. We're going to have multiple second comings, multiple judgments. We're going to have a whole bunch of stuff with dispensation. Questions? Let's pray.